Barkley Sound is probably one of the most ecologically significant areas in all of British Columbia. There's really nothing else like it. It's also relatively unstudied. We know this area is critically important for a variety of species of birds, but a lot of the data we have to refer to is several decades old. The purpose of the work the Raincoast Education Society and BC Nature are doing out here in terms of surveying birds is to help clarify the current level of abundance for a number of key species. This information doesn't just give us a snapshot of where we're at today, it also lets us start to understand how populations might be trending over time.
Engaged with Nature-Based Solutions partnered with Raincoast because this work with bird monitoring is so important to learning more about the area. And nature-based solutions are really just ecosystem services, and they're giving nature the respect and the opportunity to function as it normally would.
We front, our land fronts the Broken Group Islands and the parks that control those. Yeah, and we've got neighboring nations, Tishat and Huayet, just across from us. The biodiversity here is incredible.
The way the offshore bathymetry and the inshore topography sort of work together to create these upwellings and flows of nutrients, it's just an unbelievably productive marine ecosystem.
It's got this range of habitats from these outer, really exposed reefs and little islets right into like more sheltered harbors and bays and coves. It's got shell and sand beaches, it's got kelp forests, it's got eelgrass and surfgrass. It's amazing because there's just every possible kind of habitat for every possible kind of organism, it seems. So the herring is such an incredibly important food base for so many different organisms, and in particular for the birds.
These are like continentally significant proportions of some of these bird species coming in just to feed on herring roe, herring eggs, as well as the adult herring. It's giant smorgasbord for the birds.
And for a lot of these birds, the food that they are consuming here in Barkley Sound is not just going to sustain their flight up to the breeding grounds in Alaska, but for the females that have to lay 4, 5, 6 eggs, like that's where all of that nutrient material is coming from.
Because of the huge numbers of birds that come here during the herring spawn and throughout the year, Barkley Sound is designated as an important bird area. What the IBA designation means is that multiple species have over 1% of their global population here at some point throughout the year.
So the IBA program is an international program. There are IBAs all around the world. BC Nature is in charge of managing and sort of working with the IBAs within British Columbia. And there are a lot of them, and a lot of them are in remote, hard to reach areas. And so BC Nature works with local partners, whether it's First Nations, whether it's organizations like the Raincoast Education Society, to do the work on the ground in each IBA. So some of the different birds that are designated as key species to justify the IBA include marbled murrelets, which are an alicid. They're endangered. They are here year round. They nest in old growth forests and then they fish out at sea. Black oyster catchers, they're a shorebird. Black oyster catchers are interesting because some individuals are here not just year round, but for their entire lives. Surf scoters are sea duck. They're one of our largest ducks. They breed in the low Arctic tundra taiga habitat, like right at the edge of the northern boreal forest, and they winter all up and down the coast. But we get huge concentrations here in BC, particularly during the early spring when migrating birds stop to feed on herring roe during the herring spawn. The only way to make sure that we have an accurate picture of how many birds are using an IBA is to get out there and actually count them. A lot of work was done in the 70s and in the 80s here, and then there wasn't much of anything at all. So it's important to refresh that data periodically so that we have a really good idea of how these IBAs are working for the birds today rather than 50 years ago.
Starting in 2022, Raincoast Education, in partnership with Birds Canada and BC Nature, have been conducting bird surveys during the herring spawn. These surveys are non-invasive boat counts conducted by 2 or more field techs, typically targeting large flocks of seabirds on the water and on popular reefs and islands throughout the Sound.
So the IBA network is, at the end of the day, it's just a bunch of polygons on a map. It's sites that we know that are important, but unless somebody else is willing to put in the work to manage them, to steward them, to protect them, to preserve them, all we know is that they are important pieces of habitat. So by having up-to-date data, by having a good idea of what's happening on the water or in the forest, as the case may be, that information can then be shared with people who have the wherewithal or the authority to manage that habitat. And so,
Yeah, it gives us not just the language, but some evidence, because people have been looking at how many birds use this site for the last several decades, and hopefully we'll continue to get information over the next while as well that will help to make sure that there's evidence for the fact that it is a really important place.
So the work that's happening in Barkley Sound is a really important example of a nature-based solution, because it's working with the environment, it's helping to support the ecosystem and the species that are in it, and it's working toward greater knowledge and respect of this place. So my hope would be that we can continue to work with First Nations and with scientists and with anybody who cares about this place in order to learn more about it and to recognize the value that's already inherent.
Certainly, one of the most important things that I can say about the birds from this area is that they have a purpose here, and any study that's happening will make sense of that purpose.
My hope is that we maintain this as a really rich, biodiverse place, not just for the birds, but for all of us.
Collecting this data is really fun because it's just a fantastic excuse to spend time in this most incredible place. But ultimately, it's important because it provides concrete scientific information that we can apply towards meaningful conservation. That application of data in the service of stewardship is what the IBA program is really all about. And it's also at the very heart of our mandate here at the Raincoast Education Society.